Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah.
And on that acknowledgement of country, you had something to offer as well, didn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I knew this was Gadigal country, but coming in, Glennis looked Gadigal up, and the first part of that, Gada, I think, is a grass tree. So the group is named after a tree, which is actually what happens for a lot of Aboriginal people. Their naming actually comes from trees or for the landscape in one form or another. So that was, I mean, I'm trying. I have enough trouble with English, so learning Indigenous language is really problematic. But it's great because it puts things into place which you kind of understood vaguely, but then you understand a bit more. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thanks, Idris. Well, look, I'm going to begin this discussion with a few minutes of reflection for which I'm going to refer to some notes. I'm sorry to bring the logo of a tech giant right squarely into the middle of everything, but this is the easiest. I want to be careful in how I want to not read, but certainly have some notes to support a brief encapsulation of what I've observed in those 30 years that Randy alluded to. Because I first met Idris in '93, that same year that you joined King Street Gallery. The qualities of expression that we see in these paintings haven't just fallen out of the sky. They've been worked at over a long period. They're the fruit of persistence, continual inquiry. And that's why I think before we even start to talk about ideas or motivations or any of that, it's really important to simply observe and describe what is here, and to understand these paintings, which are recent paintings, in light of that longer development, which I have some vantage point to describe. So I'll commence. So as I said, I first saw Idris's work in '93 at King Street Gallery when it was over on Burton Street, 2 small rooms in Burton Street. In fact, one of the things I remember is that on the steps that led from the front room to the second, there was a little green square, like a foot plate of worn paint, green and
fabulous.
red.
Green and
it
red.
Looked like your paintings.
Yeah, it did. I was jealous of it.
Idris's paintings of the day had red.
I kept looking down and thinking, wow, what a great colour combination.
And in subsequent interviews and conversation, Idris has said that in the early '90s, that was really the beginning of his maturity as an artist. I know that he really found and committed to the landscape subject, let's say, not genre, but the landscape subject in the '80s. But the intensity and consolidation of his pictorial language came together, I think, in the early '90s. And he's nodding, so okay, good. But of course, that wasn't the start of his painting life. He was in his 40s at that time. And so there was a 20-year period before that I don't know so well, and that it's not so easy to find works from. They come up from time to time. There certainly must have been a lot of them. But we're talking here, as I said, these are works that have come out of the fruit of long reflection, and it's also it's significant that it took 20 years to feel like you were actually getting somewhere as well.
That's true.
Sorry, that's not a question. So no. just hold on. Just bear with me.
No.
And the first observation I want to make about these qualities of these works that I'm taking time to describe is that these days I sense a strong faithfulness to place in Idris's painting. The spaces seem real, with fluid movements between depth and nearness. There are shifts from the wide view to enclosed corners. The textures and the light are highly specific and utterly different from painting to painting. These are terrains that feel like they have been walked through. And you might say, well, of course, they're landscape paintings, but Idris's paintings haven't always been like this. There were times when they were composed of roughly painted flat oblongs slotted onto a squarish picture plane. The generalised qualities of landscape were foremost at some moments, with the paintings only just hinting at the unique atmospheres of the places he may have had in mind. His thinking was closer to cubism than to naturalism. I'm not saying that these are utterly naturalistic. I'm not saying that they're untouched by modernism, not at all. But there was much more of an inward and intellectual feeling in his work at one point. Today, Idris does still paint some radically simplified formal pictures, but very often they're filled with the mystery of colour, meaning that they still breathe and flex. They're anything but generic. Colour has always been a key element, perhaps the key element of Idris's painting, and that's something we're planning to talk about in some depth today. Over the years, Idris's tree types have proliferated and diversified. They're not illustrative of botanical species, but they carry the expressive qualities of trees as he has noticed them over the course of his travels. Often when he paints a tree, I think he's declaring his and our kinship with them. They stand, they lean, they reach. Sometimes they almost cower like vulnerable figures. They seem sentient to me, not inanimate. I don't suppose trees are inanimate, but the word sentient seems appropriate to the way that they answer and are responsive to the space around them. And again, this was not always the case. In the work of the 90s, a bald, upright brushstroke tended to do the job, or a blunt wedge protruding from a horizon. I hope you're not offended here.
No.
I was quite taken aback in the 2000s when your trees first took on fine branch structures and started to sprout leaves.
Oh yeah, leaves.
It seemed like you were casting aside restrictions that had been maintained for a very long time, dropping the hard line between representation and abstraction, saying yes to a simpler self. Again, no insult intended. But one thing that has not changed at all in these 30 years is that we are able to make acquaintance with Idris, the maker of the picture, through his brushwork. His brush tells the story of how the image was found. It ventures forth to establish a compositional structure, then comes back to argue the case from the other direction. The rise and fall of Idris's energy is in the brushstrokes. We can see when he's put in his trust in potentially rash actions and when he's given in to not knowing. And this has never ceased to be the case. I think it's one of the reasons that his work draws so many admirers. Finally, Idris's exhibitions have never been presentations of a group of similar-sized paintings that reiterate the same basic idea in a range of colours or flavours. His motifs and visual themes are in perpetual evolution, and his thinking plays out over long periods, meaning that a painting in this exhibition may have qualities that are closer in kind to a painting done 5 years ago than to its neighbour on the wall in the gallery. And this is why the recent survey exhibitions have been so necessary. They show the longer cycles, although I think that even those exhibitions haven't quite given us a complete view of Idris's visual thinking. There's the drawings, there's a lot of work that hasn't been dragged out. So we hope for further examinations of that. Now in the catalogue for this show, Vibrations of the Primal, there is a photo of an exhibition catalogue from 1974. Idris's second solo show at Macquarie Galleries, and sorry, the year I was born. And I wanted to start by asking what you remember of your work at that time, and do you still feel close to that young 20-something-year-old painter, or is it he just another person?
You didn't tell me you were going to ask this question. I remember myself being incredibly naive. You know, I came from Bankstown when I was a kid, not known for its cultural kind of niceties or interest. My parents were great in that sense that they just let me get on with it, whatever it was I was doing. Dad was a forest officer when he was young, so the bush played a really important part in that early period. All right, okay, here we go. Is that on? No?
Speak into it, I think it is.
On. It says on.
Yep.
Can you hear that? Okay, I'll go for that. Yeah, and if I mumble, just say, please say it again. Oh gosh. Look, one of the things I must say is that recently, because I'm doing the coffee table, you know, the big monograph thing that I'm doing, and that should be out sometime before I die. But it's really interesting when you have to ask a question like that, because what I can remember is I'd graduated, I was young, dyslexic, so I found painting and the National Art School my saviour, and I had some supportive, very supportive teachers at times. And Kevin Connor, bless his heart, has just departed and gone to a better place. He took me down to see the first exhibition at Macquarie Galleries, which was the bee's knees of galleries in this country. And it was our mate from Bribie Island, Ian Fairweather's show. And Kevin introduced me to Mary Turner, again gone now, but she was the guiding force. She had a bit of a chat to me and said, Lloyd Rees is coming in tomorrow for a cup of tea. Would you like to come in and meet him? Oh, no, sure, okay. Lots of things happened out of that, which, thinking back, was pretty amazing. But I made some joke sculptures, as they were called, which was my bad sense of humour, and my kids would say dad jokes. One of them was, I don't know where they are. Someone bought them. Goodness knows what they're doing now. But one of them was called, what was a thong in my heart, which was tiny little kids' thongs, very Australian, embedded in resin, which had all cracked and played with and stuff, which looked very groovy at the time. What I was painting, I'm not sure even what, I mean, I remember some of the titles were just made up from rock magazines or something. So, I mean, that's naive. I remember being introduced to the next show down there, introduced to someone, no, I was next to somebody having a drink, and I said to this guy, hi, my name's Idris, and he said, oh, my name's Patrick. I said, Patrick, what do you do? And he said, oh, I do a bit of writing. I didn't know who Patrick White was.
His name's White, not Wright.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, Patrick White. Right, okay. Well, I didn't know who he was, but he was rather gentle about the whole experience. So, you know, I was just young and whatever.
And how's the 50 years since then been? What can you say about your sense when you come into a show now and this is your work, and here you are, and I mean, there are things that look incredibly easily, effortlessly done that actually speak of great earned sensitivity. I've got to find a question out of this. How do you have a sense of satisfaction?
Oh, like a sense of satisfaction. Well, that comes up the whole thing of, you know, how do you finish your painting? I mean, look, you can't help but realise that you made these works in relationship to all those artists that you loved and had admired and learnt from. I mean, I had Glenn Stein lived in Paris quite a bit, so we had a lot of chance to sit and read books on Matisse, sitting in front of Matisse's paintings. I mean, how lucky was that? Looking back, you know, and Glennis was off dancing, so she made the money and I just made bad Matisses. I mean, it was as simple as that, really. Yet you imbibed this incredible vision of great pictures, and you could spend a lot of time in front of pictures as well, and that looking and hopefully openness. But also, as you know, I met an English painter who will be one of the great lost masters of British painting if he doesn't die soon, is my age. But Andrew Carnegie, he basically took me aside after we got to know each other and said, look, you know, you've been talking about surface, but really you don't know what you're talking about. And he was right. And he took me to the National Gallery and showed me what I was missing. And he was right again. So my most known in my head experience was seeing a Van Gogh, a real one, for the first time, not a glossy magazine version. The rawness, the directness, the honesty, I don't know what else, but it was both scintillating and, I was trying to find a word for it, excoriating, I think might be the word. Humiliating, certainly. I realised that this was a great artist, this was actually a great painting, and I wasn't there, and I had to start again. And it took me 4 years to get over that experience because I kept falling in front of other great pictures and thinking, shit, I can't do that. And Andrew kept saying, no, you can't, but you could. Mm.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things there that I might pick up on.
Yep.
One was about the fact that you do see certain paintings as great.
Yep.
You've been influenced very much by European art.
Yep.
Now, when I saw the poster for this exhibition, I saw one of the pinkish works on the poster. Yep. A lyrical, lovely work. Raw, of course, but lyrical and lovely. But there upon it was the title Vibrations of the Primal, which is a pretty heavy title. And I thought it might be useful, given that you're talking about the historic overview and what you aspire to in your work. Yeah. Maybe I should just read that quote in context.
Yeah,
I've got it.
If you got it, yeah.
Because on its own, it's a portentous, potentially intimidating title.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was actually going to go in the catalogue, this quote, from George Steiner, So from the book called Real Presences, the great role occupied by the esoteric, the part of Zen, of the Kabbalistic, of the shaman, in, for example, The Genius of American Abstract Expressionism, tells directly of the difficulties which the artist faces when he or she seeks for an idiom truthful to their creative experience in a society, in a moment of history, where the frankly theological is so largely held in derision, where a rationality modelled naively on that of the sciences and technology prevails, where agnosticism, if not a consequent atheism, is the norm of approved discourse. It is immensely difficult for an artist to find works for his making, for the vibrations of the primal which quicken his work. Pervasively, however, major art in our vexed modernity has been, like all great art, like all great shaping before it, touched by the fire and the ice of God. So that's the context for that Vibrations of the Primal title. And what's the connection for you between the beauty of your works and that phrase? Well, because when we did our rehearsal, let's call it, the other day, you did make a connection between that phrase and the idea of beauty. Yeah, that's true. I guess I've lived through the postmodernist theorist idea of painting, and at times met lots of pretty interesting art theorists and writers and painters. And at one stage, I mentioned, this is years ago, but I mentioned that I was interested in beauty, and it was sort of everything stopped, as if, how could you use that term now? I learned from that lots of things, really, but I always knew that there was something beautiful in the great pictures I looked at. But also I started to realise how extraordinary the country is that we live in. And it's a different kind of beauty, and I had to get my head around a different kind of beauty which wasn't a European kind of beauty. I remember doing Two-Thirds Sky, which is a documentary, which is way back now, but I remember in that saying, you know, I'm not a European anymore, and I'm not. And so something of the landscape and the beauty of the landscape, but philosophically, you know, beauty is a strange and wonderful thing because there is no end to it. There will be no end to it. I mean, if you read Job having a go at God, the answer that God gave Job was, have a look at the universe, have a look around. Beauty, 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 beauty. It's something that transcends things. And great pictures have that. There's a beautiful kind of quality in them which transcends the artist, which transcends the time. I mean, to transcend, Yeah.
So let's continue this line of thinking, but with colour as a point of reference. Colour, as you learnt about it and experienced it from a tradition of painting that was primarily European.
Yep.
Just talk to us about what you admire in, say, in Matisse's colour, and what did you imbibe in your years in Europe about colour? Because what I want to then ask is about how did Australia change that?
Gosh. Well, let me take a left field example of this and why I paint a bit like I do. Now, I don't use Matisse's colour range. He set up his own landscape in his studios and bought beautiful hats and wonderful chairs and great colour and material and built his own landscape, really. And he painted that landscape in many ways. And thinking about how he did that, one of the things that it took me a long time to work out as how he used colour, and I couldn't work it out for years and years and years, even though I was sort of practicing it, but I didn't understand it. After looking at his work for a long time, one of the things that was revealed that he was maybe the first European artist ever to give up light source. So the whole Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, after that, and still now, the light source, the sun, or the candle, or whatever light source you had, was dominant in the way artists looked at the world because it gave the world a certain kind of form and volume. He fought that battle for half his career more, and eventually he just said, my colour comes from the canvas. The colour that I put down is certainly related to the sense of light, but the colour is what colour I put next to the next colour. You know, when you put two colours together that really work, in quotes, I suppose, one enhances the other. You get another colour. Something happens in between those two things when they work. And so I guess that's what I started to learn from looking at Matisse's colour. And of course one looks at other artists who do the thing differently. Morandi has always been enormously important in thinking about composition and colour as a tonalist. Yeah, I don't know.
That's good. That's great.
Well, yeah, okay.
So in your long travels across Australia, what have you seen that's changed your sense of what's possible with colour in painting?
What I saw was when I first went to the outback and stayed there for a while and watched the sun go down, watched the sun come up, saw the change of light, saw different times of the day, was that there was every colour out there that you could ever imagine, and I can steal all of it and use it anytime I like. And that wasn't my experience, certainly at that stage of the East Coast bush, of which I'd known when I was a kid. But having said that, now I look at green quite differently. You know, there's something about the East Coast. I think Les Murray said that it was beautiful boringness, and I think he's right. There's an ambiguity about the Australian landscape, which is both enormously, the colour is just too extraordinary in some parts of the world, in Australia, in the world of Australia, in the Kimberley, and you know, look, outback generally. When light hits certain kind of angles in the rocks, it explodes in luminosity. But then there's also the subtlety of it, tiny little flowers that reflect the world in some other kind of subtle way.
Mm-hmm. And for me to just reflect again on the development of colour in your work, when I see those very early works from before the 1990s occasionally, I think that, especially say that the really early 1970s, early 80s, the they have the color of other art.
Yeah.
They have, and I can see who you've been looking at.
Yep.
And then in the 90s, what happens is that you did settle for a time on red and green as a primary, relationship, and a tough relationship. The paintings of the 90s were very flat. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
They were almost like shields in there, that they held you out.
Well, I think that's I think that's good. I mean, I tried to use terms. How could you depict the Australian landscape? And a shield is a good one. It's usually flat, reflects things. Glynis and I collect shields from Papua New Guinea and Indigenous stuff. But also the flag. There was this whole series of things where I was thinking of, okay, how do you describe the landscape in the way in which I experience it anyway? And what symbols, or how could you, what language do we use? I mean, one of the problems is the language of colour and of even mystery and so forth. We've lost the language to describe.
And it's interesting that when I ask you about the 90s, you end up talking about looking for a way to paint, right? Whereas now I think that you have ways, many ways, and they are just in permutations that keep evolving.
Yeah.
But to return again to this observation of how the use of colour has developed, when you started to use metallic colours, which I guess would have been the 2000s?
Yeah, something like that.
A lot of people, I think, didn't understand it, and I think it was polarising. Sorry.
Polarising.
Did anyone tell you?
Polarising. That's a good word.
And I didn't altogether understand it until I went on one of the trips with the Fowler's Gap group out to Fowler's Gap. And I saw that out around Broken Hill and in all directions from there, the ground has within it a lot of metallic colour and that gleam of mica. And of course, the pigments you were using were micaceous pigments, paints that actually had mica in them. And I recognised that what I had often taken to be a kind of flight of fancy with colour was actually directly depictive. It was, you were painting the way things looked. Now, there's a quote that I think of in relation to your work from Emile Zola, a quick definition of art. Zola's definition was a corner of nature seen through a temperament. And it seems to me that your colour, that's what your colour is. It's seeing, but it's also the poetic translation of that. And that the use of these new paints that came along was a part of that.
Yeah, I must say, it's funny when people ask you questions, because I remember when I worked for my dad, who had gone from the forestry into dry cleaning, we used to have a boiler out the back, which created the heat and the power for the equipment, right? And it rusted, so you had to look after it. And my job was to paint it with stuff called silver frost. And I've never forgotten the idea that you could paint over lots of different things with one colour, right? And it somehow made them better. And I quite like doing that. And I'd forgotten all about it until a couple of things reminded me. But I guess two things happened nearly at the same time. One is, Joe's right. I mean, I saw stuff in the outback which was gold and silver on the trees at different times of the year, which there was no colour really for it. And then I found that someone in the acrylic making market made a silver paint. And so I bought silver and then I mixed the silver as my white. Instead of using white, I used silver. And I found colours which just knocked my socks off. In fact, I'd often get Glynis and say, come and have a look at this colour. It's a really crap painting, but look at that colour. And sometimes I'd take photographs of it and Glynis would come back and look, 10 minutes later, the whole picture changed and I'm off somewhere else. But that colour thing and that metallic just gave me a reference to what I'd seen, as you say, but also just in formal terms. Hey, Matisse didn't have metallics. Let's go.
some commentators on your work have cited that colour is the thing. It's your key element. And they've done so with almost a sense of moralistic disdain for other painting in Australia that failed to grasp the potential of colour.
Oh dear!
And with an implication that Australian landscape painting really has been overridingly tonal and held back in its emotive appeal because of that. Not sure I totally agree, but we did play a game the other day I named some artists. No living artists.
Yeah, we always quote dead ones because they can't sue you.
And I wanted Idris to tell me what he thinks of them as. Well, just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down about their use of colour. And I'm going to cite some artists who I think do use colour well. Whether they're colorists or tonalists ultimately is a question for the art historians. But
yeah.
John Glover.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh gosh, this is sort of like 20 questions.
Just give us thumbs up or thumbs down.
Oh no, look, John Glover used colour beautifully, but he's a tonalist. He's not a colorist. This is our big kind of thing that we're talking about, right? What is a colorist? What is a tonalist? But go.
Arthur Streeton.
Yeah. Anyone that cuts down the tree so he gets a better view of a picture is all right by me, I reckon.
Charles Conder.
I don't know if I could comment really. Impressionists. Look, it's what I like about that whole period of Impressionism and later on Cubism, but certainly Impressionist. One of the things I learned in Paris was the first big official, I suppose, or semi-official exhibition that the Impressionists had in Paris. They had to go and get extra cleaners to clean the spit off the works. And I'm not talking just little spits, I'm talking cigar spits. They hated them. Now, we find that nearly impossible now to see.
Do you hate them?
No, I don't. I just, the colour's too broken up for me.
Well, what about John Peter Russell?
That's an interesting one, John Peter Russell. I think historically that will come back to Australia in a big way. If I look at the dates of Matisse working on Belle-Île of France, I would say that Russell taught Matisse about colour. If you see, he's painted boats with red sails on a blue sky, red and blue, before Matisse went that direction. So Matisse was a great tonalist, initially, but he couldn't help himself. When you see his work, he just had to put that bit of red in or that bit of blue, and eventually it just took him over. And colour does that. Something about colour transcends just about everything. I think it's, if you want an argument about, the different art forms, I would say that music is probably the most direct to the senses and soul, but colour is my music.
Yeah, okay. I've got a long list here. I think this will take too long, but quickly, Grace Cossington-Smith, just thumbs up or down?
Yeah.
Clarice Beckett. I know she's a tonalist, but she uses colour.
Yeah, but see, this is the thing. She had all that tonalist kind of thinking. That was where she's coming from. But she also could put two colours next to each other that could sing. Yeah. So, that's really interesting. Basically, I can paint pictures which are a bit tonal, and some of these are, but it's really colour that floats my boat. So I have to go back to that.
Albert Namatjira.
Oh yeah, well, I painted a couple of pictures called Homage to Albert Namatjira, to other Indigenous artists, because they could do things. Albert, what he did was so, I think, fantastic, because most artists that go out now, they see that blue sky out there, especially if I take people from other countries. The blue is so blue at different times of the day. There's no end to it. You can't actually quite get that blue, but it just overpowers everything. And Albert worked out that if you put a big tree from the top to the bottom and it's bright white, it holds back that blue. And he does that beautifully. And he was a smart dude. Yeah.
From there, I'll just read through my list and make a point. I have, Sidney Nolan, Fred Williams, Sam Byrne, John Olson, William Robinson, Ginger Riley.
Yeah, Ginger.
Emily Hungware.
Yeah, Emily.
And I suppose the point is that as this list becomes closer to us in time, we're encountering two other influences in Australian art that were not felt before, which is obviously the art of the First Peoples and their descendants, but also untrained artists. And I think the use of colour in your work, I mean, let's look first of all when Aboriginal artists started to work with acrylic paints on canvas. What did that show you that you hadn't seen before?
Well, it was, I mean, basically, I'm just trying to think how, when I first went to London to work, I remember going to the paint. There's certain things you remember still clearly. And I saw this picture, this little picture, which was so out there by a guy called Alfred Wallace. And that, once I found that, I found a kind of way to move in another direction from Matisse to some degree, and yet still this flat colour kind of thing, naive completely. He was a sailor, he left the sea. I mean, he got that picture in the tape because Ben Nicholson and quite a lot of other artists who worked down that part of Britain saw something in the work which I still see and love. So the naive thing, I mean, our collection, a lot of our Indigenous collection is basically naive artists.
But I was actually looking more at Australian Aboriginal artists.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so you moved from that, and probably the most images we've got now are from Glennis. Where are you? What's his name? The Indigenous guy that we're collecting, Adrian Robinson, who is in a wheelchair. He's non-verbal. He paints his mother's country. He's represented by Bindi Arts. When I saw the first pictures, and I bought a couple little ones, which I still have, I thought, this guy paints like me. And I thought, hey, look at this one. This is even better. And look at this. And so I bought a couple, and I bought a couple more, and I've still got them. I've got about 4 in a package. I haven't had a chance to unwind. But yeah. But the guy has the natural kind of placement and ability that a lot of Indigenous artists do, to be able to put things in relationship to each other that just work. And when you've learned a lot about painting, you've got to unlearn a lot about painting. And these guys can help you unlearn somehow. I think I've got a Corey Surprise picture, which sits on our kids' wall, which is red with big stripes through it and nicely painted in such a way that splattered bits of paint. It is an expression in its own right, and the colour's fantastic, and you get where she's coming from. Where you get out there, in the Nullarbor recently, I was told a joke. This is a joke, right? Okay. This guy told me, oh yeah, it's flat out here. He said he got one advantage. He said you can see your dog running away for 3 days.
It's 45 minutes have gone past.
Yes.
And
we're rabbiting on.
Is there, before we open up for questions, which I think you're open to?
Yeah, sure.
Is there anything else you want to say about to round off this discussion, or just generally about where you are with this show?
No, look, I will read you just because I can't damn well. If I got it here. Yeah. There's a couple of bits. No, I won't go too far because it's going on and on. But I had to write this down because this is a quote from Simone Weil, right? Now, she's a heavy lady, this gal. I won't give you too much about her, but she's playing with my head, but it's the best kind of play. But she says, there is no finality in beauty. She's talking about something outside ourselves, which will go on and on and on. We are part of it, but it is transcendent. And, you know, when you go out in the outback, you realise that you can paint pictures, and that's something different, but you can't make what's happening in front of you. We ain't God, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Idris.